It was a gloomy afternoon in the small, picturesque village of Ashwood. The streets were quiet, and the air carried a faint chill. Detective Eleanor Gray, known for her sharp mind and keen eye for detail, was sitting in her modest office, flipping through old case files. The room was cluttered with books, papers, and a few framed awards from her past successes. Just as she was about to call it a day, there was a knock on the door. "Come in," she said, looking up. A young woman, dressed in a black coat and clutching a handkerchief, stepped inside. Her eyes were red, and she looked as though she hadn't slept in days. "Detective Gray, I need your help," she said, her voice trembling. "My uncle, the famous painter Charles Whitaker, has died. But something about his death doesn't feel right." Detective Gray gestured for the woman to sit. "Tell me everything," she said, leaning forward. The woman, whose name was Clara Whitaker, explained that her uncle had been working on his final masterpiece, a portrait of a mysterious woman no one in the family had ever seen. The painting was nearly complete when Charles was found dead in his studio, slumped over his easel. The local police had ruled it a heart attack, but Clara was convinced there was more to the story. "Why do you think it wasn't a heart attack?" Detective Gray asked. Clara hesitated. "My uncle was in perfect health. He had no history of heart problems. And then there's the painting. The woman in it. She looks haunting, almost as if she's watching you. I feel like it's connected to his death." Intrigued, Detective Gray agreed to take the case. The next morning, she visited Charles Whitaker's studio, a small cottage on the edge of the village. The room was filled with canvases, brushes, and jars of paint. In the center stood the unfinished portrait. The woman in the painting had piercing green eyes and a faint, enigmatic smile. There was something unsettling about her gaze, as if she knew a secret no one else did. Detective Gray began her investigation by speaking to the villagers. Most described Charles as a kind, reclusive man who kept to himself. However, one elderly shopkeeper mentioned something unusual. A few weeks before his death, a stranger came to the village, the shopkeeper said. A woman. She visited Charles's studio several times. No one knew who she was or where she came from. Detective Gray's curiosity grew. She searched the studio for clues and found a small locked drawer in Charles's desk. Using a hairpin, she picked the lock and discovered a stack of letters. They were written in elegant handwriting and signed by someone named Isabella. The letters spoke of a deep, forbidden love and a promise to meet again. The last letter was dated just 2 days before Charles's death. As Detective Gray pieced together the story, she realized that Isabella was the woman in the portrait. But who was she, and why had she disappeared? The detective's search led her to an old manor house on the outskirts of the village. The house had been abandoned for years, but recent footprints in the mud suggested someone had been there recently. Inside the manor, Detective Gray found a dusty room filled with old paintings. Among them was a portrait of Isabella, identical to the one Charles had been working on. The date on the painting was over 50 years old. Confused, Detective Gray dug deeper and uncovered a shocking truth. Isabella had been Charles's first love, but she had died tragically decades ago. The woman who had visited Charles recently was an imposter, someone who had used Isabella's memory to manipulate him. Detective Gray confronted Clara with her findings. "Your uncle's death wasn't a heart attack," she said. "He was poisoned. The imposter wanted to stop him from finishing the portrait because it would reveal her true identity. She was afraid of being exposed." Clara gasped. But who was she? Detective Gray handed her a photograph she had found in the manor. It was of a young woman who bore a striking resemblance to Isabella. She was Isabella's granddaughter, the detective explained. She wanted revenge for a family feud that had torn them apart years ago. With the mystery solved, Clara thanked Detective Gray for her help. The portrait of Isabella was completed posthumously and displayed in the village gallery, a haunting reminder of love, loss, and the secrets that lie beneath the surface. As for Detective Gray, she returned to her office, ready for the next case. But the image of Isabella's piercing green eyes stayed with her, a silent testament to the power of art and the mysteries it can hold.